They said the Blackwell plantation was cursed long before the fires ever came, that its soil drank more blood than rain, and that no one, not even its master, ever left untouched by its darkness. In the Deep South, 1852, the Blackwell estate stretched across 1,000 acres of Louisiana swamp. Cotton fields glowed white under the sun, but behind the beauty was rot. And at the center of it all was Thomas Blackwell, a man feared more than loved. Thomas was rich, proud, and cruel in ways that made even his overseers uneasy. He believed everything could be owned, land, people, even fate itself. But there was one thing he couldn't control: his daughter, Eleanor Blackwell. To the world, she was a disappointment. A young woman too large for the delicate dresses of her class, too quiet for the parties she was never invited to, too soft for the heart of a man like her father. While other daughters married into power, Eleanor sat alone at the window. Watching the mist rise from the fields, she'd once told a servant, "I'd rather die than be given away like cattle." She didn't know that wish would soon come true. One sweltering summer evening, Thomas called his overseer into the parlor. The lamps were dim, his cigar smoke hanging thick as his voice cut through the silence. "If no man wants her," he said coldly, "then she'll take what I give her." He pointed to a name written in his ledger: Samuel. A strong field hand, barely 30, known for his quiet defiance and unbroken spirit. Samuel had never bowed, never begged, and that made Thomas hate him all the more. By dawn, the order spread through the quarters. The master was giving his daughter to a slave. Some whispered it was punishment. Others said Thomas wanted to humiliate them both. But deep down, everyone knew he was playing with something dangerous. When Samuel was brought to the big house, he didn't resist. He stood tall, eyes steady, his expression unreadable. Eleanor stood beside him, pale and trembling, her hands twisting the hem of her dress. "From this day forward," Thomas declared, "you are bound." No priest, no prayer, no blessing, only chains, invisible but heavy all the same. That night, thunder rolled over the plantation. Rain lashed the fields as the two were sent to an old cabin on the far edge of the property, a place no one had lived in for years. For 3 nights, there was silence. No light, no voices, just the sound of wind through the broken shutters. But on the 4th night, everything changed. Screams tore through the storm. Some said they came from Eleanor, raw, terrified. Others swore they heard Samuel's voice, low, chanting words not meant for human tongues. When the overseer finally arrived, the cabin door stood wide open. The fire inside had burned out. The air smelled of smoke and something metallic, blood or iron or both. The bed was empty, the floorboards scorched, and right in the center, a strange blackened mark burned deep into the wood, a spiral surrounded by 7 points, like the sun drawn by a child. No one could explain it. The slaves called it the mark of justice. Thomas called it the mark of a curse. He ordered the cabins sealed. No one was to speak of what happened. No one was to mention his daughter's name again, but whispers don't die easily. They spread, through the quarters, through the fields, through every rustling tree. Some said Samuel had vanished into the swamps. Others said he'd taken her spirit with him, bound forever in that mark on the floor. And on certain nights, when the fog crept low and the moon turned red, the sound of a woman's sobs echoed from that cabin, mixed with the low hum of a man's voice, singing a song no one alive remembered. That was the night the Blackwell curse was born. And it was only the beginning. If you want to know what really happened to Eleanor Blackwell, and what the slaves found buried beneath that cabin weeks later, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. After that night, no one saw Eleanor Blackwell again. The master told the world his daughter had taken ill and been sent away for rest. But everyone on the plantation knew that was a lie, because the cabin where she had been sent with Samuel still stood, and sometimes when the wind shifted, smoke rose from its chimney. Even though it was supposed to be sealed, the slaves stopped walking near it. The dogs refused to go close, and Thomas Blackwell, for the first time in his life, started to look afraid. He stopped sleeping in his grand bed and instead drank himself to sleep in his study. staring at the portrait of Eleanor that hung above the fireplace. Her painted eyes seemed to follow him everywhere, but the thing about curses is that they don't care who believes in them. It began with small things: milk turning sour overnight, tools rusting within hours. The cotton fields, once thick and white, began to wither under a sunless sky. Then came the whispers. At first, just a sound, like voices in the wind. But soon, the workers swore they could hear a woman crying in the night. Sometimes she called a name. Sometimes she only said one word: why? The overseer, Mr. Crane, tried to keep order. But when 2 men disappeared after being sent to fix the cabin roof, no one else would go near it. Crane went himself. He came back pale, shaking, muttering something about eyes in the dark. And the next morning, he was gone too. His bed empty, the window wide open, footprints leading toward the swamp. That's when the preacher arrived. He was an old man from the next parish. Known for driving out darkness, Thomas sent a carriage for him, desperate to prove his land wasn't cursed. But when the preacher stepped onto the Blackwell porch, he froze. He said the air itself tasted wrong. They led him to the sealed cabin. He placed his hand on the blackened door and pulled it away, trembling. "This place," he whispered, "ain't touched by death. It's touched by injustice." He refused to go inside. That night he left the plantation before dawn, muttering a final warning to Thomas: "You can't bury what you broke." By then, the story had spread to every nearby town. Travelers stopped taking the road past Blackwell lands. The plantation workers began slipping away one by one, disappearing into the swamps to find safer fields. And still, Thomas stayed. He couldn't leave, not while Eleanor's portrait hung above his hearth. Every night he sat staring at it until dawn, and every morning he swore the face had changed just a little. Her eyes darker, her smile fading, until one night the painting's frame cracked in half, and the canvas fell to the floor, torn clean down the middle. That was when Thomas finally broke. He rode into town, drunk and shouting about demons in his house. No one believed him, until the fire started. It began in the fields. The dry cotton lit up like powder. Flames roared toward the main house, turning the night sky red. And through the smoke, several witnesses swore they saw her, Eleanor, walking through the fire, her gown untouched by flame, her face pale as bone. She didn't look at the house. She looked past it, toward the cabin, toward the place where her soul had been bound. By morning, the Blackwell plantation was ash. Only the cabin remained, and in front of it they found Thomas Blackwell's body, kneeling as if praying to something that would never forgive him. On the ground beside him lay the same spiral mark, burned into the dirt. This time it was fresh, still smoking. That was how the Blackwell story ended. Or so people thought, because decades later, when new settlers came to rebuild the land, they said the soil was black as ink. Nothing would grow there. And every few years a traveler passing by swore they saw lights moving through the trees and heard a woman's voice whispering, "He gave me away, but I took everything." So don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story, because the next chapter will haunt you long after the screen goes dark. The Blackwell plantation burned to ash in 1852, but fire doesn't end a curse. Sometimes it feeds it. For nearly 20 years, no one set foot on that land. Travelers passed by with their horses quickening at the sight of the blackened fields. Locals whispered that the soil was still warm, as if the earth itself refused to cool. But in 1871, a man named Jonathan Hale bought the land. A northerner with money and ambition, he laughed at the rumors. He said curses were for children and fools. He wanted to rebuild. By spring, his workers cleared the remains of the big house, every charred brick, every burned doorframe. But one thing they refused to touch: the cabin. It still stood on the edge of the swamp, half sunken, leaning like it wanted to fall, yet never did. The door was burned black, the inside swallowed by shadow. And when the men went near it, they said the air grew heavy, like someone was holding their breath. Jonathan didn't believe them. He took a lantern and went inside himself. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots. Dust floated through the beam of light, and in the center of the room, faint but still visible, was the same spiral mark burned deep into the wood. He knelt to touch it. The second his fingers brushed the blackened grooves, the lantern flickered, and from somewhere below the floor came a sound, tap, tap, tap. He froze. The sound came again, slow, deliberate, like knuckles on wood. "Hello?" he called out. No answer, only silence, and the faint smell of smoke. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the tapping, not outside, but inside his mind, like someone knocking on the walls of a memory that wasn't his. By morning he ordered the floor torn up. The workers refused, so Jonathan did it himself. He pried up the boards one by one until the air below rushed out, cold, damp and foul. Then he saw it, a small space, a crawl cellar, and inside, bones, 2 bodies, their skeletons tangled together. One small with a broken ribcage, the other larger, its wrists still bound with rusted iron. The larger skull faced upward, mouth open, as if screaming even in death. Jonathan stumbled back. He shouted for help, but the men had already run. The sheriff came that afternoon. He examined the bones quietly, his hat in his hands. "This woman," he said, pointing at the smaller skeleton, "wasn't buried. She was hidden." "And the man?" Jonathan asked. The sheriff paused. "He was chained here, maybe to keep him quiet. Maybe because someone feared what he'd say. They took the remains to town." But that night Jonathan returned to the cabin alone. Something in him couldn't let go. He had to understand. When he entered, the air was colder than before. His lantern dimmed again, and in the corner, carved into the wall, were faint letters. At first he thought they were scratches. Then the words took shape. "I forgive him, but I will not rest." He dropped the lantern. The flame spread across the dusty floor, illuminating the spiral mark once more. But this time it wasn't just burned into the wood. It was glowing. The fire rose fast. Jonathan ran from the cabin, his breath ragged, eyes wide. When he looked back, the entire structure was engulfed in blue flame, silent, cold, unnatural. The next morning, there was nothing left. No ashes, no bones, no sign the cabin had ever existed. And yet, in the dirt where it once stood, the spiral mark was back, fresh, smoldering. The sheriff returned, but he said nothing. He only stared at that mark and whispered, "The dead don't rest when they were never given peace." Jonathan Hale sold the property a week later. No one ever lived there again. The land returned to silence, but not peace, because sometimes, late at night, travelers still see that faint blue glow in the distance. And if they get too close, they say they can hear a voice beneath the ground and whispering, "You can rebuild the house, but not the sin." The curse of the Blackwells wasn't over. It had only just begun. So make sure to like, subscribe, and share, because what comes next will chill you to your bones. Years passed. The world moved on, but the land never healed. Locals still called it Blackwell Ground, though no one alive remembered the family's name. Children were warned never to play near it. Travelers swore their horses refused to cross the old boundary line, their eyes rolling white with fear. Then, in the autumn of 1894, the blood moon rose, the largest in half a century. And with it came a stranger. Her name was Clara Bishop, a historian from New Orleans. Young, determined, and far too curious for her own safety. She had heard rumors of the Blackwell curse and wanted to document it, not for belief, but for proof. "Every curse," she said, "begins with a crime." She arrived at the edge of the ruined plantation just before dusk, her notebook in hand, her lantern bright against the thick fog. To her, the place looked ordinary, a field of dying grass, trees twisted like reaching hands, and in the distance, a single circle of scorched earth. That was where the cabin once stood. Clara walked carefully to the center and saw it. The spiral mark, faint but visible, burned deep into the soil. When she traced it with her glove, she swore she felt warmth, like something alive pulsing beneath. That night, she set up camp nearby, determined to stay until sunrise. She wanted to hear the land's story for herself. At midnight, the wind died. Even the crickets went silent. Then came the first whisper, soft, almost tender. A woman's voice drifting through the trees. "He gave me away." Clara froze. She turned, lantern shaking in her hand. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the faint echo of a man's hum, low, rhythmic, like an old spiritual sung through the earth itself. Her lantern flickered, and the ground beneath her boots began to move, the soil breathing, rising and falling. Then the voice came again, closer this time. "He gave me away." "But I took everything." Clara stumbled backward. Her foot hit something hard, metal. She brushed away the dirt and found a small, rusted locket. Inside, a miniature painting of a man and a woman. The man, unmistakably Samuel. The woman, Eleanor Blackwell. But the strange thing was, in the painting, they weren't forced together. They were holding hands. Before Clara could react, the wind howled through the trees like a scream. Her lantern went out, and then the soil split open. From beneath the ground rose a figure half buried, drenched in ash and shadow. It wasn't flesh. It wasn't ghost. It was something caught between both. Its eyes burned blue. Its face, both Eleanor's and Samuel's, shifting between the two as it spoke. "We were bound by cruelty." But death bound us tighter. Clara fell to her knees, trembling, tears cutting through the dirt on her face. "What do you want?" she whispered. The voice answered from everywhere and nowhere. "To be remembered truthfully." And then silence. The ground stilled. The figure faded into the mist like smoke returning to fire. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat by the mark until dawn, clutching the locket in her shaking hands. When morning came, she gathered her things and left, but not before writing one final note in her journal. "The curse is not vengeance. It is memory. The land remembers what we choose to forget." She mailed her notes to a historian friend in Baton Rouge. Days later, her tent was found empty on the edge of Blackwell ground. Her notebook gone. Only the locket remained, lying open in the dirt. A week later, during the next blood moon, the spiral mark reappeared, larger, brighter, and burning. Locals said the earth had taken her too, for listening when no one else dared to. If you think Clara's disappearance was the end, you're wrong. We uncover what her letters revealed, and the final horrifying truth about what Thomas Blackwell did on the night his daughter vanished. Hit like, subscribe, and share, because the next chapter will expose the secret the fire tried to erase. They said Clara Bishop vanished without a trace, but that wasn't true. A week after her disappearance, a weather-beaten mailbag washed up along the bayou, carried by the current from Blackwell ground. Inside were her journals, soaked, half-burned, but still legible. And what she wrote inside them changed everything people thought they knew about the curse. Her first entry was dated 3 nights before the blood moon. She wrote about strange dreams, a woman's shadow standing by her tent, whispering words she couldn't understand. She kept hearing a single name, Samuel. The next page was smeared with dirt and ash. But the last words she managed to write before she vanished sent chills down the spine of the man who read them. She wasn't given to him. She begged him to take her. When the sheriff of St. Landry Parish read those words, he reopened the Blackwell case. He and a small team rode out to the ruins of the plantation, carrying Clara's lantern and her recovered notes. The ground was silent, the sky grey. They found the spot where the cabin once stood, the spiral mark still faintly visible in the earth. And when they began to dig, what they uncovered was far worse than bones. 6 feet down, beneath the roots of an old oak tree, they found a chest. Wood rotten, metal hinges rusted, but sealed tight with blackened wax. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were letters, dozens of them, written in a woman's hand. Each was signed Eleanor Blackwell. The first was dated 2 weeks before her disappearance. And in that letter, Eleanor's voice came alive again. "Father says I am to marry no man of my choosing. He says my worth is in obedience. But obedience is death, and death is already in this house." The later letters grew darker, desperate, trembling. She wrote of her father's rage, of nights locked in her room, and of Samuel, the man she was given to. But Eleanor's words revealed the truth no one dared imagine. He did not take me. I went to him. He treated me as human when my own father did not. I loved him, and for that love we were condemned. The sheriff read in silence as the letters unfolded a hidden history. Eleanor and Samuel had planned to run away together. The night the storm hit, the night everyone thought she'd been forced to live with him, they had been preparing to escape. Thomas Blackwell found out. He sent his men to the cabin not to bless a union, but to destroy it. He ordered Samuel chained and beaten. He ordered Eleanor locked inside with him to let the devil take them both. When the storm came, lightning struck the chimney, setting the roof ablaze. The two died together, trapped beneath collapsing beams. And when the fire consumed them, the spiral mark burned itself into the floor, carved by the heat and blood and hatred that filled that place. The sheriff closed the box of letters and said quietly, "It wasn't a curse born of evil. It was born of love betrayed." He ordered the letters sealed and sent to the courthouse for safekeeping. But that night, the courthouse burned to the ground. The cause was never found. All the letters gone. And yet one thing remained, the chest untouched by flame, with a single new message burned into its lid, words that no fire could erase. "We were not sin, we were sacrifice." The sheriff resigned the next morning. He left town without a word, leaving the chest behind, and ever since that day, no one has dared rebuild on Blackwell ground, because every time someone tries to dig there, the soil seeps red, as if the earth itself remembers their blood, their vow, their truth. And when the moon turns red, locals say you can still hear Eleanor's voice drifting over the fields. "He gave me away, but I chose him first." The Blackwell secret is no longer buried, but the curse has one final act left to play. You'll discover who tried to profit from the haunted land and what the curse did to them. So make sure to like, subscribe and share, because what happens next will prove that some love stories never die. They only burn brighter in the dark. Decades passed. The story of the Blackwell plantation faded into whispers, then into nothing more than a ghost tale told to frighten children. But in 1912, a new man arrived. His name was Dr. Charles Hensley, a historian from Boston, ambitious, skeptical, and hungry for fame. He'd heard of the curse of the Blackwell land and believed uncovering its truth would make him legendary. He bought the property for a small fortune, ignoring the locals who refused to even step near the place. Old women crossed themselves as he passed. One told him plainly, "That land remembers, sir. Don't go waking what it buried," he laughed. Because Charles didn't believe in curses. He believed in history and in rewriting it for profit. The first thing he did was dig where the old cabin once stood. He wanted to find that chest, the one the sheriff mentioned in his notes. For 3 days, he and his workers dug through mud and roots until they struck something hollow. They found it. The same chest. But this time, it wasn't empty. When Charles lifted the lid, he expected to find dust and wood rot. Instead, he found a wax-sealed jar, filled with what looked like river water, murky with something floating inside, and a folded piece of paper pressed against the glass. He broke the seal and unrolled the note. It read in faint handwriting, "She asked to be taken back to the water. When you open this, she will return." Charles scoffed. "Superstitious nonsense," he muttered. Then he poured the water out. The smell hit him first, like sulfur and decay. Then came the wind. A sudden gust from nowhere, powerful enough to knock his lantern over and snuff the flame. The workers screamed and ran, but Charles stayed, staring as the ground began to move, as if breathing. Something rose from the mud, something pale, like fabric soaked for years. A woman's shape, half rotted, half formed, emerging from the earth. And for a moment, she looked alive. Her lips moved. No sound came out, only air, like a sigh that had waited too long. Then faintly a whisper, "Samuel?" Charles stumbled back, horrified, as her face turned toward him, not angry but pleading. He dropped the jar, glass shattering, and bolted for the house. By dawn, every man who'd been working that site had vanished. Only Charles remained, sitting on the porch, staring into nothing, whispering, "She's still down there," waiting for him. When the sheriff arrived, he found the historian's journal open beside him. The final entry was written in a trembling hand. "It's not the land that's cursed. It's the promise they made." She said she'd wait for him in death, and she meant it. They buried Charles in St. Mary's Cemetery, but locals say his grave never stays clean. Every few nights, mud seeps through the grass, and a faint spiral appears, just like the one found on Blackwell ground. After that, no one tried to rebuild again. The land was fenced off, overgrown by vines and moss. And still, when the moon is red, travelers on the old river road swear they see two figures walking hand in hand by the bayou, a pale woman and a tall, shadowed man. They don't look back. They just walk toward the water, and when the wind shifts, you can hear her voice echo across the fields. "He gave me away, but I never left him." The story could have ended there. But it didn't, because in 1972, a team of archaeologists broke the fence and stepped onto Blackwell ground one last time. And what they uncovered beneath that spiral finally proved that love and death were never done with this place. Don't miss the legacy of the curse. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share, because the final truth will leave you speechless. They said the Blackwell curse died with Dr. Hensley. They said the land was silent again. They were wrong, because in the summer of 1972, a research team from Louisiana State University arrived to conduct an archaeological survey of the old plantation grounds. Led by Professor Elaine Porter, a pragmatic woman who didn't believe in superstition, the team set up camp just a few yards from where the Blackwell house once stood. Elaine was determined to document the ruins and put an end to the legend. She even joked on camera, "If there's a ghost out here, I'll invite her to tea." But that laughter wouldn't last long. On their second night, the team's motion cameras began picking up shadows, tall, flickering shapes that moved against the wind. One camera captured something even stranger, a woman's voice whispering just one word. "Wait!" The voice wasn't in any of the recordings. It wasn't even heard by anyone who was there. It only appeared when the tapes were played back, as if the land itself had chosen to speak through the machine. By the third day, they found something beneath the ground that shouldn't have been there. A spiral of stones, perfectly circular, just like the mark from 1849. At its center lay a metal locket, corroded but intact. Inside was a miniature portrait, a man and a woman. The man was Samuel. The woman was Eleanor Blackwell. Professor Porter examined the locket and wrote in her log, "They were buried together. Whoever placed this here wanted them to rest side by side, as they never could in life. But when they tried to remove the locket, the ground began to tremble. The air turned cold, the trees groaned, and a wind tore through the camp, scattering papers like snow." Elaine screamed at her team to stop digging, and then the earth opened. The pit swallowed their excavation gear, and one of the students swore he saw hands, pale, reaching up from the dirt, not to harm, but to hold. That night, the remaining team packed up to leave, but when they reached the highway, their truck stalled. Every radio in the vehicle turned on at once, playing a faint, crackling tune, an old plantation waltz. And over it, a woman's voice whispering, "You should have left us." When the sheriff arrived at sunrise, he found the truck empty. No footprints, no struggle, just a circle burned into the asphalt. A week later, locals claimed to see two figures walking through the morning fog, one in a white dress, one in torn work clothes. They held hands, disappearing into the trees near the old plantation road. The government fenced off the area for safety reasons, but the locals know the truth. They call it Lover's Hollow now. And sometimes, under a blood-red moon, you can still see the faint glow of lanterns drifting across the bayou, the final trace of two souls who refused to be separated by death. Professor Porter's camera was found months later, deep in the swamp. The last footage on the reel showed her hand brushing the spiral of stones. Then faintly, a voice, calm, almost gentle, said, "We are free." The screen went black, and to this day, No one who has watched that footage at night claims to have slept soundly again. Some say love dies with the body. But on the Blackwell plantation it never did. It became the land, the air, and the silence that follows every storm. So next time you hear the wind whisper a name, don't answer it. If you've made it this far, you've survived the curse. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share, because more haunted histories are waiting. And the next one might just be closer than you think.